Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Ikram Jama. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I work at the Department of Equity and Inclusive Communities. I probably know many of you who are on the call, but I can't see yet. And my role at the Department of Equity and Inclusive Communities is Director of Human Rights and Equity. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is a traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. I want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us today for the first session of the EDI Speaker Series. The objectives of the EDI Speaker Series are to create spaces and opportunities to discuss, reflect, learn, unlearn, and perhaps gather some tools to further dismantle the inequitable systemic barriers in our recruitment, hiring, retention, and promotion practices. As we continue to implement the EDI Action Plan, and start our work on Black inclusion, we look forward to more engagement with you all. I hope you all find this session engaging, fruitful, and beneficial for our future work. And again, really welcome you to actually joining us today. I know it's a busy time, and it shows that, with 160 registrations, that this is really an important topic to many of you, and that's very gratifying. Now I would like to pass the mic to my colleague, Krista Craven, EDI Learning Specialist at EIC. Krista.
Thank you so much, Ikram, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We're really happy that you all are here. So as Ikram noted, my name is Krista Craven, and my pronouns are she and her. So the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Speaker Series is an initiative of the Department of Equity and Inclusive Communities here at Carleton, but it's funded by the Canada Research Chairs Program, and specifically the EDI stipend that they have. So the speaker series will take place this year in 2023 in both the winter and upcoming fall semester, with 4 speakers in total coming to Carleton, either virtually or in person, to discuss issues of equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and anti-oppression in the context of higher education. So today we're so excited to have Dr. Annette Henry here for our inaugural session for the speaker series to discuss initiatives to address anti-Black racism in Canadian universities, and also some caveats for regarding their implementation. So please feel free to submit questions for Dr. Henry at any time during the talk, and we'll use those questions to guide the Q&A session with Dr. Henry after her talk concludes. But we also want to recognize that we may not be able to get to every question that's submitted to us, particularly as there are lots of folks joining us today. Also, all questions that are submitted will only be visible to the session moderators. So we just wanted to let you know that. So thanks so much again to everyone for being here. And so I'll now pass it on over to Eunice Oladejo, our EDI Speaker Series Coordinator, to introduce Dr. Henry.
Thank you, Krista. And again, thank you for everybody who's joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Annette Henry, who will be giving us our talk for today. Dr. Annette Henry is professor in the Department of Language and Literacy Education and cross-appointment to the Institute for Race, Gender, and Sexuality and Social Studies. She was a former department head and held the David Lamb Chair in Multicultural Education in the Faculty of Education. Her scholarship examines race, class, language, gender, and culture in socio-cultural contexts of teaching and learning in the lives of Black students, Black oral histories, and Black women teachers' practices in Canada, the US, and the Caribbean. She has written extensively about equity in the academy, Black feminism, and conceptual and methodological research issues, especially in cultural specific contexts. She's the recipient of several academic awards, including the Canadian Association of University Teachers Equity Award, Outstanding Contributions to Gender Equity Award from the American Educational Research Association, as well as awards from the community such as the Legacy Award from the National Congress of Black Women's Foundation and 100 Black Women Honoree in 2022. So it's our pleasure to have Dr. Annette Henry with us to give us the talk.
Thank you so much, Eunice, and thank you very much, everyone, for inviting me to be your first speaker for your series. I'm very grateful for that. I'm speaking to you today from my home office and I live and work on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Musqueam people. As you may have noticed, I've changed my title a little bit, but the content is about the same. And I liked the way Ikram talked about the series, because when I first was invited to be the speaker, I thought about it, and I went to your website and I looked at the kinds of things you're doing. I tried to find out as much as I could about your series, about your university and what you're doing in terms of anti-Black racism. And I said to myself, well, they seem to be on the right track. They seem to be doing all the right things. And what could I say? What can I tell them? What can I, I'm not a guru, so to speak, but I think, as Ikram said, it's really important for us to come together and discuss these issues. And I know some things and you know some things, and the exchange we have is meaningful, can be meaningful and insightful. And we're all struggling with the same issues on our university campuses. We're all trying to make it a place where people feel that they can belong. People feel that they're acknowledged, that their work is acknowledged, that it's a place that they want to get up in the morning and come to. So that's, I think, something that I'm looking forward to is the questions that you may have or the comments that you may have. Very, very important. This on the right is my mother. I have to say on the right because, sometimes people used to say, which one of you is older, which is so annoying. But this is my beautiful mom, and who's no longer with us. And most of how I understand the world is because of my mother. I do remember something that she told me when I was probably just about 10 or 11. And I think about it often. And she said, racism will not disappear in my lifetime or yours. I definitely have to agree with my mom on that. But we can say that we can make some progress in some areas, even though we have a long way to go. And indeed, racism is ubiquitous. It's like the air we breathe, as some people have said. I just thought I'd put up a definition here of anti-Black racism. It's more not so much a definition. I think it's more that I wanted to just emphasize that it's deeply entrenched in our institutions, policies, and practices. As Morgan and Bullen say, that it is either functionally normalized or rendered invisible to the larger white society. And quite frankly, I would say not even the larger white society, because sometimes policies and practices are just so normalized that people of all races and backgrounds don't question them or don't think about them. And so, for example, I was thinking about this the other day, where it's just normalized that, and this affects more than Black students, quite frankly, but students who don't pay full tuition are penalized. So I remember a student had come to me about 3 years ago and said, can I see my grades, because I don't pay full tuition, so I don't get to see my grades. And I said, what are you talking about? And maybe it's my ignorance. It was obviously my ignorance, but I had no idea. And so you have, on the basis of economics, people are marginalized, and very often they would be Black students, Indigenous students, working class students. who can't pay full tuition. And therefore, there's a lot of the privileges of being at UBC or any university that are denied them. But just kind of wanted to put that out there because it didn't seem to me, and I could be wrong, and when I read the Scarborough Charter, I didn't really see a definition of anti-Black racism, even though it's talked about all the time. I might be wrong on that. In the wake of George Floyd's murder, universities across the country and across the globe, we can say, have made poignant pledges towards equity and anti-racism. They've vowed to address racism and make stronger links with racialized communities. Most universities have had task forces on anti-racism. Senior administrative positions have been created on race and inclusion. Millions have been committed towards financial support for Black students. Commitments have been made to hire Black faculty, often cluster hires. That's mostly where I'm focusing today, by the way. Black-focused advertising has been, the latest thing, if you like, and it's been actually quite interesting to see the kinds of advertising that is going on. Black studies is something that is talked about across the country, and there's a number of places that are thinking about or have created institutes, programs, and even centers. And of course, the Scarborough Charter on Anti-Black Racism is the roadmap for all of us. Even though I think there are some universities who have been doing these, for example, I'm thinking of Dalhousie and York, who definitely have been thinking about Black studies for quite some time. And I think since about 2016, Dalhousie has had a program. So it's a time of promise and a time of hope. There are exciting opportunities for the creation of new curricula as we hire new Black faculty. It's also a taxing time, excuse me, for all Black faculty, both old and new. Faculty who've been in these higher education institutions all along, and even relatively new faculty are expected, excuse me, to spearhead these Black hiring initiatives and make the university a more equitable and diverse space, or at least, if not spearhead, to participate in these initiatives. And of course, we want to as well. I don't know whether you read the first-person account of someone who was recently hired at McMaster. He wrote in the University Affairs in February 2022, and I'm just going to read just part of this. I'm quite sure that there is an unspoken form of expectation that can be summed up as, oh, you've arrived. Now, do more to show that you really belong here. As a process that sought to attract the most excellent Black scholars in Canada and overseas, I am already feeling the pressure to do more, as though, so I've got a frog in my throat, as they say, there is already not enough on my CV to indicate that I've surpassed many academic expectations and milestones. I've been a faculty member at 3 universities, and there's always been a moment where someone has said, basically, oh, you're here now, or this is why we hired you. This reminds me of the questions posed by Corbado and Galati in The Atlantic. They asked the question, do diversity and inclusion initiatives take into consideration how minorities placed in those environments feel? How can policies create not just more equitable hiring processes, but address the emotional toll of being a racial minority in a professional work setting. We might want to talk about this in the question period. All the wonderful initiatives mentioned mean that someone has to do the work. And hopefully, collectively, we can reach these anticipated goals. We feel obligated because, as one colleague said to me when we were debating on whether to join a task force, well, Annette, we can't have people talking about Black lives with no Black lives at the table. On the other hand, it's an exhilarating moment, as I said earlier. Personally, I no longer feel like that one Black person on the campus waving the flag to think about racism or Canadian Black scholarship, rethinking courses to include Black content. Things are different now. You know, we hired 12 Black faculty last year and are going to hire 12 more in the following year. The move to Black inclusion is both exciting and overdue, and also contributes to what Jelando Jackson calls the burden of diversity. And people have had other names for this, haven't they? Like Hirschfeld, the cultural taxation, for example. Many Black faculty are necessary doing equity, diversity, and inclusion work, whether or not in a formal EDI position. In their daily lives, be it even through their curricular choices, in their faculty interactions, standing up in a department meeting around an issue, even negotiating their positionality in the classroom. And now in the near future, with a preponderance of search committees. You know, it's actually quite an interesting time in universities because I don't think my university is unique in this, but there's so many people retiring as well. So it's a time for renewal. And it's interesting to see how universities are going to look in the not too distant future. Right? A lot of people are retiring. Maybe those lines might not be renewed, but also we are really thinking about literally changing the face of the university. So it's an interesting time. I want us just to consider the ways in which the burden of diversity, if you like, can include race and gender, as well as other dimensions. And I put the quote by Audre Lorde there because we are dealing with a system of power. And we can't forget that. It's not just a question of including people from different racial backgrounds. We're talking about an institution and we're talking about a system of power. So yes, I want us to consider about the ways that we're positioned differently in the university or in any institution. It's astounding to me that when I respond to someone, when I say I cannot do something and suggest a Black man, I say, why don't you ask Neville or Kevin or Ibrahim or somebody? The response is, well, he's really busy. So where does the perception come from that I'm not busy? I'm just sort of hanging around the campus? No, but as we move towards our goal of inclusive communities, we have to examine the ways in which people are positioned differently in the institution. Black women are scrutinized differently by other faculty, staff, and students. And I've written about this elsewhere. I'm not going to talk about it unless you want to talk about it later. But I just want to put that out there a little bit. Also, and you know, when we think about we're going to be hiring Black faculty, we can't think about just this amorphous Black people. So Black people have all kinds of different identities and backgrounds. And I thought this was really an interesting study. And it's actually a study that really is talking to leaders, as you can see from the title. But some of the data in it is very interesting, thinking about how you know, issues of marginality along dimensions of skin tone, colorism, along the lines of queer, you know, sexuality. So thinking about trans and queer Black women's experiences, for example. And so we have to take all of those things into consideration. So an intersectional analysis allows us to prize apart the complex system of power relations in which we're all embroiled. And we don't really want to talk about colorism or texturism even, you know. I certainly remember going to my job interview in Chicago years ago. I worked in Chicago for 13 years. And, you know, once I got to know the office assistants, and which all were Black, by the way, once I got to know the office assistants, one of them said to me, "Girl, when we saw you come in for your interview, we said, this girl is brave." I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, you didn't straighten your hair for the interview." You know? And that, you know, that's just one example of the ways in which whiteness makes us want to conform, and also the ways in which we're judged. And so when we think about all of the ways, and people talk about unconscious bias and things like that, you know, what's going on when we see a candidate? What are the judgments we're making? And also, what are the pressures on the candidate to conform to whiteness, if you like? I think, you know, we don't talk about that enough. And I know we have equity training, and I don't know how deeply those things even one would even go in equity training. I think today we're also more comfortable talking about sexuality and equity than disability or colorism. And so you know, there's a lot of layers to unpack in when we think of equity training, and also in terms of the equity training that happens when we are in a search committee situation. I'm not sure how it happens at Carleton, but certainly at UBC, we sort of have somebody who comes and talks to us about issues of equity if we're on a search committee. So this article was in Catalyst. You can find it on catalyst.org. And as I said, it was really geared towards senior leaders and trying to encourage senior leaders to display more curiosity and allyship, and how that affects the institution. Actually, this is a slide. This is an example of a bad slide because you probably can't read it. But on the right, I'm trying to, I just did a screenshot of Melinda Smith's diversity gap infographic data that she used to publish on an annual basis, where she would show how, you know, board chairs, chancellors, presidents, deans and VPs, you know, she would break down the male, female, visible minority male, visible minority female, and Indigenous numbers. And so the gray, blue, turquoise is white men, and the brown is white women, and visible minority men is the blue, and the orange is visible minority women. And so you can't even see the Indigenous there. So that's you know, something to talk about too. So we are seeing Black people in a number of senior EDI positions across the country, and that's great. And I wonder whether we also shouldn't look at who is in which senior provosts and presidents I'd love to see more Black people, especially Black women, at the academic table, meaning executive level. Or provost. Barbara Crow and Alice Pitt's 2020 article mentioned this in their University Affairs article, the gap at the top there on the left. I've been asking myself this question for quite some time. In 2002, when I was in Chicago, I took a leadership course in a program for the so-called Big Ten universities. And we went to different universities. We met with presidents and senior officials and talked about the universities, how they're organized, some of the issues that the universities have. And I noticed at that time that every Black person in the program was a director of multiculturalism, because that's what we talked about in those days, multiculturalism rather than equity. Was a director of multiculturalism, a director of diversity, and that was 21 years ago. And I would hope that things would have changed, but they really haven't. And please don't misunderstand me, because I think these positions are useful and important, and can bring a lot of meaning, not only to the person doing the work, but to the community. But as new administrative EDI positions are being created, and I must say they're not easy jobs at all, we have to remember that they can also contribute to tokenism and cultural taxation mentioned earlier. Incidentally, on a recent episode of the American television program, To the Contrary, Donna Edwards, former Democratic congressman, mentioned research that shows, this is American research, of course, and showed that EDI positions were being created after George Floyd, but have, quote, slowed to a crawl or even reversed. She continued that data shows that EDI officers are stepping down because they're realizing that there isn't a real commitment beyond a title in inculcating EDI in the entirety of the workforce. The message here is there must be a willingness to put in the work to change the culture from the bottom up. And also, you know, it's the work of all of us. We all have to be doing the work, so that, you know, it's not enough that we have EDI. I don't want to use the word officers. We have a vice president of equity, for example. Those are important jobs. But we also, in our departments, you know, from the dean down, everybody has to be doing the work. Despite the fact that university search committees undergo some kind of equity training, it's still quite astounding how often departments and units reproduce themselves. So this is a quote that was not a quote. This is something I heard in one of the places that I've worked, where we were debating on a candidate of color, and this is my humble opinion, but it seemed to me that we were finding excuses not to hire the person. And these are the ways in which perpetuate the status quo. And we hire people who keep whiteness intact, right? We find reasons not to hire qualified candidates, be it Black or racialized. And sometimes, and this happens a lot in tenure and promotion meetings, might I say, it's that people don't understand the work of racialized candidates. You know, I'm spilling the beans here, but it does happen. You know, because we might publish in journals that are not mainstream, who ever heard of that journal? I don't know that journal. Is that a good journal? And so these are the ways in which whiteness is kept intact. Another thing is talking about fit, which is a really slippery term. This person wouldn't fit in our department. What does that even mean? So there's really good news. I enjoy going to university affairs and seeing the kinds of positions that are being advertised. To me, it's like, that's just marvelous to see. Job advertisements are calling for research agendas with anti-oppressive, anti-colonial perspectives and work that focuses specifically on Black people. So good things are happening. I noticed that Carleton just posted an assistant professor position in anti-Black racism. SFU just posted a history position focusing on the Black Americas. So it's really a beautiful time and to see, what happens with these searches. And this affects our students, doesn't it? All things are connected. The Black hiring strategies have the potential to positively affect students who look like them, validate their backgrounds, and understand the kinds of work that graduate students want to study. I don't know who's in the audience, but I'm sure I'm not the only person who's been an internal or external examiner and wondered how that Black student's dissertation might look if that student had had the guidance of a Black supervisor. I did a Black graduate student study in our faculty, along with Baseba Opini, Kimani Karengu, and Stella Nemai. And these were just 2 quotes of many quotes where the students were really demoralized by the curriculum. The student who says there needs to be more Black curriculum overall, and especially for a faculty that prides itself in equity and social justice. Ouch. And there's nothing really within the curriculum that speaks to us. It's all Eurocentric. So, we can't take the curriculum lightly, and students. I think you would probably remember several years ago when the students' movement, curriculum so white. Students want a curriculum that reflects the society they live in and reflects their realities. So let's talk about cluster hiring. This is a beautiful picture from Queens. Cluster hiring is only one of many ways that universities can address the complex epistemic and curricular gaps. I was part of a cluster hire at the University of Washington. It was a hire when I was at the University of Washington Tacoma campus for 5 years. And so at the time, it was a very small campus working its way to be a full campus. It was only a 3rd and 4th year campus. And so we were building a campus and to 4-year and master's programs. And we hired, there was one of us in every faculty. And so we weren't clustered in the same programs and faculty. However, even so, we kind of were like a little cohort, and I still have those friendships to this day. There's ample research to show the challenges and the benefits of cluster hires in a single department or across faculties. with the presence of a range of junior and senior faculty, hypothetically anyway, there's more bodies to take on the service work that often falls to Black faculty. There's also an opportunity for more support, a greater opportunity for Black mentorship, cultural understandings, depending on who's hired, of course, and sociality, and higher likelihood of satisfaction. You know, I spoke to somebody who was hired in our university about 2 weeks ago, and I said, well, how are you finding Vancouver? Because Vancouver, you know, it's very white. It took me about 3 years to get used to Vancouver. And I was very surprised. So she said, well, it's not so much Vancouver. She said, you know, we all live close to, this is like of the Black hires. You know, there's a group of us that live close to each other. Our kids play together. So we're doing well. So that actually was a beautiful thing to hear. So they didn't have such a sense of isolation in their private and social lives. And then, you know, they didn't feel so alone. And sometimes it can be very lonely moving to a place like Vancouver from the United States as a Black person. I certainly have had, you know, students in my office, Black American students, sort of in a little bit of a shock after a few months. Let's talk about the campus environment. What kind of environment are we bringing faculty members to? I remember asking this question. We were trying to hire an Indigenous scholar. This was when I was a department head. And I asked this question and I tried to get a discussion in the department and nobody responded. And then after the meeting was over, somebody said, oh, Annette, that was important, that was important, that was important. And I said, well, why didn't you say something? You know, we have to be willing to talk about these issues. You know, how are we preparing for our new hires? Do we have an environment in which people want to stay? Are departments and faculties willing to undergo a cultural change? Are we willing to invest the time to mentor people? Because that is time. Are we willing to invest the time and resources? Are we just going to assume that new faculty will fit in? They can fit into our culture, rather than think about, now, what are the kinds of ways in which our culture needs to be more inclusive? How much preparatory work has been done to examine the climate in which we hope to invite Black faculty members and the potential support, if any at all? How do we understand cultural differences, Black ethnicities, as we hire Black people from across the globe? It's wonderful to know that universities are spearheading Black postdoctoral programs and even pre-doctoral programs. So this is from Queen's University, as you can see. I think they're doing lovely things there, as well as Carleton. These are critical for us as Canadians to help mentor the next generation of Black Canadian scholars. One of my goals since arriving to UBC has been to emphasize the rich tradition of critical Black Canadian scholarship in a series that I called Race Literacies, in which I invited Black Canadian scholars, of course. We're in great proximity to the United States, and given the historical significance of Black America throughout the Black diaspora, we have to acknowledge, as Ronaldo Walcott has written, that Black Canadian life takes its formation, its politics, its intellectual traditions, its cultural expressions, its contributions and consciousness in concert with other forms of global Blackness. However, I am concerned that the production of knowledge concerning Black lives and Black research is often predominantly American. I'm sure that some of you have had the same experience of working with students, especially undergraduate students, who, despite instructions to cite Canadian resources, inevitably cite US resources references. And there are many reasons for this, from the abundance of US data to not making distinctions. As we strategize about what we want our students to learn, we need to think and plan ahead, for example, about what Black studies will include on our campuses. As we continue to hire Black faculty, and as several universities are contemplating Black Studies centers, institutes, certificates, and programs, we can't ignore the importance of the United States as we talk about Black studies. After all, Black studies originated in the United States in the 1960s out of a time of turbulence and student movements and protests, and precipitated a plethora of Black curricular studies. So as we fulfill our goals to hire Black faculty, we need to think through the long-term strategic vision of what Black studies will look like on our campuses. I think I'm repeating myself a bit there, aren't I? And what Black Canadian studies will look like. So don't misunderstand me. The university is a place where ideas should be expansive and global. And I look forward to Canada producing more Black faculty. It's an overwhelming time. It's a dizzying time. It's an exciting time. And we can all take part in it. A colleague of mine years ago gave me some very good advice when she said, I will do only what I can do. Let someone else do what they can do. And I think this is simply another way of actually saying many things. The way I interpret it is to know your gifts, know your talents, know your purpose, know where you're going to put your energy, if you like. Don't spread yourself too thin in the goal to make the university a more equitable and inclusive place. When there's so much to do, there's so much service work, if you like, to do, it behoves us to really think about what we're going to focus on and put a hedge of protection around yourself, because I think we're asked to do, especially as racialized people, we're asked to do a lot, especially as Black people. And we can't apply in the affirmative to every request, but the important thing is to be involved, is to do something, whether it is on a search committee or mentoring or a number of other initiatives to foster an inclusive institution. I think in the, let's just call it the intermission, there were some things that I didn't say that I just realized I wanted to say around hiring and recruitment. So forgive me, because I'm going to go back and I realized I didn't say those things. So with the cluster hiring, speaking of environments, if you like, we also have to think about our colleagues, and not everybody's going to be on board, and not everybody understands, and there can even be resentment, misunderstanding, like, why are we hiring all these Black people? And we don't like to talk about this, but it's a reality. And maybe as racialized people, we don't really hear it as much, but it's a possibility and a reality. This is part of creating that possible future, helping faculty understand the importance of hiring strategies. We have to ask ourselves questions such as, what kind of professional development do search committees undergo to be able to respond to candidates' questions? How are faculty being recruited? I'm not sure we do a great job, and this is, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me we don't really go out of the way to recruit. Here, I'm saying here in Canada, how could I know what the whole country is doing? But how are we ensuring the experience for Black candidates or racialized candidates in general is as humanizing as possible? When I left OISE, when I graduated with my PhD, I had 6 interviews, 3 in Canada and 3 in the United States. And I can truly say 3 of them were very dehumanizing in one way or another. I'm going to share a couple of examples that I really like that show the ways in which people recruiting and the process can be interesting, let's just say. So I've written about these before. There was a department chair at a research-intensive university in the United States, and it was actually in a very rural campus in Illinois. And so it was much harder for people to want to go to a rural campus. They would rather come to Chicago, where the campus that I was at, you would think. And so he took advantage of a program called a Targeted Opportunity Program. So it afforded him the possibility of hiring when there was no search. So Targeted Opportunity Programs were used to hire women in STEM and underrepresented minorities, so to speak, in the US. So one of the things that he did, he relentlessly pursued high quality Black candidates to the extent that if a Black candidate whom he tried to recruit had turned down the offer, he would call them 6 months later and ask, "Are you happy with the decision you made? Would you like to reconsider?" In this way, he was able to develop a nationally renowned faculty of education with outstanding Black faculty who were satisfied with where they were and spent their entire careers at the institution because they had if you like, critical mass of Black faculty. By contrast, my campus, part of the same university system, was located in Chicago, which is a large, vibrant urban center. And I would occasionally meet graduate students who would teach all day, in faculty of education, often students teach in the daytime and take courses at night. And they would opt to drive the 200 kilometers for their evening class at Urbana-Champaign because they felt that it was a more Black-friendly campus with more Black professors, and they felt more of a sense of belonging. Even the things I shouldn't say obviously, but they have changed since then at the Chicago campus. But that is an interesting phenomenon, and it shows that who is in your faculty really matters for the students. Another example that I've talked about before is when I went for an interview at the University of Cincinnati. I met with the dean, who was a Black man himself, and I felt very much that I was an individual. I wasn't just the candidate that's coming in on Thursday or candidate number 2. He sat me down. He realized I was unfamiliar with the United States. He told me about neighborhoods where I might consider living, which is pretty standard, of course. He suggested salons where I could get my hair done, churches where I might go to, places I might meet like-minded people. He ensured that I meet with the Black Caucus. After the interview, upon returning to Canada, the dean himself went out of the way to call, along with other faculty members, to respond to any questions. So those two, the dean and that department chair, afforded a vision of what's possible in terms of job interviews and feeling that you are seen as an individual. In both cases, a deliberate, focused commitment to hiring Black faculty was evident. And so those memories have stayed with me. Search committees need to be ready for the kinds of questions that Black candidates may have. And we don't always ask them because we don't feel comfortable. Imagine asking an all-white committee, could you recommend a Black hair salon? Racialized candidates may have questions that our white candidates do not need to ask and often do not deem relevant to constructing the interview process. Consider this personal example. Before being hired at UBC, I made a telephone call to the equity office to find out if I would be the sole Black female professor and department head at the university and find out about the demographics more generally. It was clear that I would be the only Black woman in the faculty at that time, one of 2 Black women in the entire university. Luckily, I had a frank 45-minute conversation with the person who answered the phone and actually later became a dear friend. I appreciated the time she took, her honesty and actually understanding of the racial climate and the challenges. And she was from Ontario, also perhaps as a queer woman and also somebody who worked in the equity office, she would be sensitive to these issues. And so that was very helpful. Her frankness really helped me. It was a 45-minute conversation, which I wasn't expecting. I was just expecting, the equity officer to say, well, yes or no, or here's the deal. So really just being treated as an individual is so important when considering hiring. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know really, but sometimes we forget. Despite equity training, search committee members may still misunderstand equity and treat each candidate the same way, communicating the same information in the same order in the name of an equitable process. You know how we say, okay, Jeff, you're going to ask question number 6, and Sally, you're going to ask question number 5. By contrast, I communicated, I think I gave this example before, but I communicated the request of a Latina candidate to the search committee chairperson at a former university. She wondered whether she might meet with Latinx faculty. And I asked the chair of the search committee if she could meet with Latinx faculty, and he said no. And I asked why, and he said, well, none of the other candidates met with Latinx faculty. Well, none of the other faculty were Latinx. So it would be highly unlikely that, well, who knows, but it would be highly unlikely that they would want to meet with Latinx faculty. So actually, I talked about this a bit before, just in terms of campus climate. So we really have to think about those things. And so I'm going to go back to where I was when I realized I'd forgotten some things. Yeah. As I was saying, it's actually a lovely time, and I was saying to know what it is you're going to be involved in, whether on a search committee or mentoring a new person, you know, even those very soft touches of going for coffee with a new faculty member, you know, because they're going to have a lot of questions once they come to campus. Indeed, as my mother said, racism will not disappear in your lifetime or mine. But we have a lot of work to do, and consider how wonderful it will be for our students to see more Black representation and have more curricular options. What will it mean when students can see themselves represented? You know, I remember when I first took on the job at UBC, and students would make appointments to see me from across the campus, especially Black women would make appointments to come and see me. And they just said, I couldn't believe there was a Black woman department head here. I just couldn't believe it. So we take those things for granted. Students need to see a reflection of themselves. And also with all of the new hirings and course offerings and job descriptions that are being posted, to understand what Vivek Clark calls diaspora literacy, to understand the Black diaspora from their own informed perspectives. So I'm going to stop here, and I really look forward to a discussion and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Henry, for that talk. We're going to move now into our question and answer period. So if anybody in our audience has any questions, feel free to place them in the Q&A portion, and I will be asking those to Dr. Henry. But I guess just starting off as we kind of let the questions roll in, a really key point that you brought up that stuck with me was talking about kind of the culture of like mass commitments that are often made post tragedy. And I'm in my master's program now at Carleton, but did my undergrad career in a different institution, and I kind of saw that firsthand when we had the murder of George Floyd and all of the commitments that were made by the institution, which were a lot of commitments that had been called on by student union groups and student associations and Black student associations at the university. And so it was really frustrating to see that things that we've been calling on for years, which a major call was like increased Black faculty on campus. Things that had been ignored for years were then, made into nice documents and saying, these are our EDI commitments. So I guess the question is to you, what do you think are the most crucial structures and or practices that must be in place at the departmental and institutional level to have a proactive rather than reactive set of measures that support Black faculty in the recruitment and the hiring process?
Wow, that's a long question, isn't it? At the department level, Well, I think they're so multi-layered and interconnected. So at the department level, you know, I do think that people need to the department needs to do work on itself, you know, to be able to embrace that person rather than saying, well, this is how we do things here. Well, we don't do that here. Or we try, you know, we try because somebody's going to come in with new ideas and want to change things in a sense because, you know, they're bringing new understandings. So we have to do some work on ourselves to say, to allow that person to have the latitude to do her or his work or their work. I think, you know, so much is attitude, because we become this little group of insiders in a department. And so then the new person is in a sense an outsider. And I've seen that, and I've been in that situation, and I'm in that situation. So, you know, so the new person really, you know, is bringing new understandings, but you're told, well, this is the way we do things here, or we tried that before, it didn't work, you know. So I think we really have to do some work on ourselves in the department. And is there anything, that question was large, what I don't know if I really helped there.
Yeah.
Is there in that?
No, I think you did. It was kind of looking at the departmental and then also the like institutional level and like what
Yeah.
can be done. And I think I'll also, because we got another question which kind of relates to this, so maybe I'll just tie them all together. But somebody asking specifically about the role of faculty associations within, you know, fostering a more inclusive campus. So what practical ways of doing that have you seen from unions that have helped?
Yeah, I'm not sure about I'm not sure. I mean, definitely, you know, I must say, you know, I've gone to the union for some personal issues that have been very helpful. So I mean, I think sometimes, I mean, you know, it's definitely important to have them there, and to be able to feel like, okay, I'm actually going to faculty association on this issue. So I mean, I think, you know, they've helped me, and you know, they are very important. But I'm thinking about, you know, how do we really get to the nitty-gritty of dismantling racism? So it's good to have the policies in place, but how do you really change people's attitudes and towards you know, how do we dismantle white supremacy, basically, is what I'd like to say. That I don't know if the union can do that, but it's good to have the faculty association there, so that we can go and we can they can help us move from point A to point B.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we also have gotten a question specifically from faculty members, but this now has to do more with science faculty. So someone saying that they come from a science faculty member perspective and have seen that the faculty of scientists tend to believe in meritocracy and in objectivity. But this person is aware that these illusions from their experience as a scientist from an underrepresented group. So they're asking if you have any strategies to engage these folks in EDI activities throughout their activities. So kind of being in a culture where maybe, you know, EDI initiatives aren't as prevalent, you know, what activities they can kind of enforce to engage these groups in that.
So I don't really understand. So you're saying that because they see the world in such an objective way, is that what you're saying? That EDI is not as relevant?
That's what I'm understanding from the question. So because kind of the culture that they've seen kind of within the science realm is more of that objective way, things like EDI practices are not, maybe not as relevant, but are not as prevalent, and maybe not as, pushed forward. So what they could do.
Yeah. You know what? They probably should talk to the Black scientists. Right, they need to talk with Black scientists about that, because but also what we're talking about is social justice. We're talking about, so if if you're doing your experiments, let's say, I don't know, scientists, there's all kinds of scientists, and not all scientists do experiments, but that's one thing. So you're saying, this is how I understand how the world works, and I see the world in objective ways. Fine, go ahead and see the world in objective ways. However, we're talking about how we relate as human beings. So I don't understand how we relate as human beings is, that's a subjective experience. The way I relate to you and the way you relate to me is subjective. I also, I guess I don't really see the mismatch, because we're talking about human relations, how we relate to each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe the follow-up.
And that's sorry. So you said something about meritocracy, and I missed that, didn't I?
No,
sorry.
I was just going to touch on that.
Yeah. Meritocracy. Well, so this person questioning what has that got to do with what is the issue here with meritocracy? We don't live in a meritocracy. So is this person thinking we do?
No, I think like maybe within the culture of science.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Well, I think in academia generally, there's this idea of meritocracy, and I think really what we have to look at is privilege rather than meritocracy. We definitely in very lay terms talk about the haves and the have-nots. We know certain people, let's just say that, your parents were professors. This person's parents were professors, and this person's parents, worked in a factory. The person whose parents are professors, they're going to come to the university with more understandings. So they're going to be a step ahead just because of their privileges. So, I think when we talk about meritocracy with Black people, I think it's very dangerous, because I'm not saying that this person is saying this, but there's a kind of an idea of which has been said to me, you were hired because you're Black, rather than you were hired because you're good at what you do, because you were the best candidate. So I think we have to be careful when we're talking about race and meritocracy.
Thank you for that answer. And I'll move on to our next question. So this person says, as you mentioned earlier, racism is often systemic and can be perpetuated through unconscious biases and practices that may not be readily apparent. So in the context of Canadian universities, what specific strategies or methods do you recommend for identifying and addressing such practices in order to eliminate barriers that disproportionately affect Black faculty and other marginalized groups?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to have, a quote unquote diverse faculty, because some people will notice things just from background and experience, and so to be able to point out some things, right? So I think that's the beauty, if you like, of having a diverse faculty, because that disrupts the status quo. That disrupts things just happening the way they always have been. We also have to be careful that the racialized faculty feel comfortable enough to speak up and speak out about things. But we also don't want to leave it just to the racialized faculty to do those things. So, I mean, one of the things that's happening in my department, actually, and I should give them credit for this, they have been meeting for about 2 years. They have, well, they used to be called anti-racist lunches, but now they're called anti-racist caucus. So they meet on a monthly basis and they discuss a number of issues. So they might discuss, you know, job ads. They might discuss, you know, just issues at the university. There's always a theme, or they may take, somebody will bring a reading, so they'll take somebody's readings and they will discuss as a group, and they have lunch, and it's optional. It's faculty, staff, students, anybody who wants to come. So I think, you know, when things are from the bottom up, it's really good rather than imposed upon them. It, quite frankly, it really was imposed in the beginning, but I think they've turned it around and made it something good. Actually, you know what? It came out of me being in a department meeting, and I had said, I had maybe a little on the rude side, but I just said quite bluntly, are we just going to continue to hire white people? And then the department head gave me a job of, you know, having brown bags. And I said no, because I felt like I'm always doing events and most people in my department don't come to them. So then this poor, you know, the most junior person in the department got the job, but she turned it around, and she just has done a marvelous job of, and then other people took it on after. And it's really, you know, I have to applaud my department, because they've kept it up for 2 years now and are taking it very, very seriously. And they have sort of notes and minutes, and they log it. And so you can always go back and see what people have talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this transitions well into our next question, because you talked about tokenism and cultural taxation that often can come with, you know, EDI roles, or, you know, hiring, you know, Black staff and so on. So how can groups on campus balance this effective and diverse recruitment while ensuring that this is not, you know, a tokenistic environment?
Yeah, well, I think being aware that tokenism does happen, you know, that you're not placing Black people in a particular, you know, position. However, I do think when you hire more Black faculty, there's kind of a sense of, you know, there's more people to call you on it. Mm-hmm. And I think the Black faculty will feel stronger to say, hey, wait a minute, you know, you're always asking me to do this. It's you know, it takes a bit of education, and I don't know if everyone is going to get there to really be able to have the analysis to see, you know, what is happening. Mm-hmm. I was at a meeting recently where somebody, you know, made fun of an African name. Like, I don't think she even realized she'd made fun of an African name. You know, these are the small things that what, you know, some call microaggressions that happen on a daily basis. And for the most part, quite frankly, and I'm sure, Eunice, you've had this experience where you just kind of feel sometimes, I don't want to be bothered with this small. I'm not even going to call this person on this. Mm-hmm. You know, I've got bigger fish to fry. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge. I mean, this whole notion of how we work together on a campus in everyday interactions is a challenge. You know, there's the big issues like hiring and student scholarships and you know, the job ads and things like that. But then there's the really everyday things where, you know, a student decides, I don't trust you because you're Black and you're my professor. And so I don't think you graded my paper well. And so I'm going to ask your department head to grade my paper. You know, those everyday things that happen that are part of, you know, working together as a community.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those small things that you mentioned and the big things are often so interconnected and interwoven that, you know, one thing a lot of the times does lead to another in perpetuating a certain type of culture on campus. So I think you raised definitely a good point that, um, you know, at a certain point, it's not just the job of the Black faculty or the Black student or the Black staff to carry this weight, because a lot of the time, as you said, it is exhausting. Like, I'm just like not going to correct you on how to say my name or whatnot, but I definitely think that it's a community effort, and sometimes it's important for as faculty or staff to kind of take that extra step with other Black faculty or staff or other Black students to make sure that that culture of acceptance and inclusivity is really promoted on campus.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And actually, you know, I think the notion of collective is important. I've seen it happen actually on the Seattle, Washington campus, and I'm seeing it happen on this campus. And actually, you know, in Chicago, we did this a little bit where, you know, there's an issue and several people of color, racialized people, if you like, will go to the dean or go to the department head together and say, you know, these are the things that are happening, or these are the things we're seeing. Can we talk about these things? The other thing, the thing about that, not to put the department head or the dean or whomever, you know, in a position of weakness, let's just say, but sometimes you need a witness. You know, it's nice to have a witness with you sometimes when you have these issues and you go to the dean and you're not alone, or you go, you know, you want to talk about or even faculty association, right? Sometimes you go to faculty association with somebody, right? Because very often these issues are stressful, and you need somebody who is a little bit more neutral to even record or just give you some confidence in talking about issues that are not easy. These are not easy issues at all. Yeah,
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Henry. That actually brings us to our final question as we come to the end of the program. So I'm going to pass it back over to Krista, who's going to close us off.
Yes, thank you so much. So I want to start with a big thank you and sharing our deep gratitude to Dr. Henry for joining us today for the EDI speaker series and for sharing her incisive analyses and insights with us around the new racism and how we can think about comprehensively addressing anti-Black racism in Canadian universities. So thank you so much, Dr. Henry. We so appreciate you being here. I also want to extend a big thank you to Eunice Oladejo, who is just moderating, for doing such a fantastic job of coordinating all aspects of this, the EDI speaker series, and getting everything set up for today. And yeah, moderating the Q&A, Eunice has been doing all of the work. And so thank you so much, Eunice, for all that you've done. Also, the speaker series, I want to note, is something that Ikram Jama, who started us off today. It's something that she's been envisioning for a long time. So I want to thank Ikram for bringing this idea to life. And thanks to our departments, Equity Inclusive Communities, for supporting the series and its implementation. And a few more thanks. I want to give a big thanks to the ASL interpreters and to the live captioners for making this more accessible, and also to our tech support from IMS here at Carleton to ensure that things ran as smoothly as possible. And then, you know, thanks to the CRC for funding this, the chorus team at Carleton, Andrea, Sue, Madeline, for their support in accessing and managing the EDI stipend. And finally, thank you so much to everyone who is here today and who engaged in the session. and shared your questions. We really appreciate you joining us, and please stay tuned for our next speaker event, which will occur before the semester ends. So thank you so much, everyone.